Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is a new experiment for the Chamber, doing a Facebook Live virtual fireside chat. Both the chat is virtual and, of course, the fireside is virtual. I'm Catherine Holt. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. And I'm joined today by Kris Wirk, who is a chartered accountant and owner of Dusanj Wirk and a big player in our chamber. He's our vice chair and has been the chair of our finance committee, provides excellent advice in my personal experience. And we know that accounting issues are very prominently on the mind of all of our small and medium-sized business members. Many issues to grapple with regard to your finances these days. So we thought our first virtual fireside chat would most appropriately be dedicated to those issues. So I am going to start with a few kind of general questions for Kris to kind of provide a bigger picture overview. And we're looking forward to you sending in your questions, and they will be relayed to me, and I will pass them along to Kris, and we will do our best to answer your questions. So we're going to start now. So first of all, Kris, welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Catherine, for having me and for this opportunity to talk to the chamber members and help them in any way possible.
Okay, so I've just got a very general question. Could you talk a bit about why it's important for business owners to see their accountant at this point in time? We've been trying to stress that. There's a ton of information. People are feeling overwhelmed at times, and so we're recommending that, but maybe you could speak from your perspective about the importance of accountants at this moment.
Definitely. So I'd say there's a few reasons why chamber members should reach out to their accountants. A few ways to look at it. The first, in my opinion, would be, say, larger organizations. They would have a CFO, they'd have a director of operations, they'd have a technology expert, a legal, in-house legal counsel. And smaller organizations may not have those same positions, so they need to reach out to their accountant in a quasi-CFO role. And those would be looking at two items in particular. I'd say one is short-term and immediate cash flow. So I think one thing that accountants definitely can assist on is doing cash flow projections for businesses, especially with the change of what's expected on collections, what's expected in the future for receivables, and then also what are discretionary and fixed costs. So I think using accountants as sounding boards to help with forecasting would be one. Secondly, I think it's very important to reach out to accountants just for the latest on any of the tax information related to any of the federal and government programs. So as you know, and as many of the chamber members know, these programs have been announced, and then changes have taken place to them, and information is coming out very quickly and very rapidly. And your accountant would be the best source for staying up to date on that. I think if you're not an accountant, or even if you are an accountant, staying current on these changes is very difficult, and on the application process. So those are two high-level reasons to stay current with your accountant and reach out. And the other one would be your accountant works with a number of different businesses in a variety of industries, so they're able to relay on what's best practices or what are they seeing in the industry as a whole, and pass that information onto your business. And I know in our practice here, we work with a variety of industries, variety of size of clients. So I think we have a good barometer of what's the conditions in the short term for the economy in Victoria, and able to relay that on to our clients so they can make judgments about where they see the next month to 2 months and even further along being.
Yeah, great points. The other thing that from when I was a small business owner, the other thing that was fantastic about dealing with my accountant is they are the party that CRA expects to interact with. Accountants are the professionals that CRA prefers to communicate with. So accountants have their own channel of information and their own professional responsibility to interpret that information and provide it. So they're a much better conduit for small businesses of CRA-based and federal government, all of these different programs that they're providing. All of their professional-based information will go to the accountants, and the accountant is going to always be your best source for that information. They will always have more information than the average business owner has from the federal government. True?
That's very true. And oftentimes, we can act as a buffer too between Canada Revenue Agency and our clients. So we could, rather than the client say being on a quick phone call from CRA, having to answer a question on the fly, we could kind of slow down that process, make sure the thoughts are articulated properly, and kind of the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted on what's being sent over to them.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. A second question, what are the main issues and concerns that you're hearing right now from your clients who are business owners?
I'd say the most unfortunate one that we've heard recently over the last few weeks is assisting clients with having to lay off employees for lack of work or closures because the business is not considered an essential business. And so they've never had to deal with anything on that scale or that size. And so assisting clients on that was, over the past 2 weeks, has definitely been something new to our practice and not in that same volume ever. But that's one that we've had to assist and walk clients through. And then the other one, the other two main concern is, and I'm sure we'll get to this throughout this conversation, is the application for government programs and what government programs are available. That's been a very consistent question, and one I think that's very important for chamber members to know what's available and what's on the horizon for them so they can make plans accordingly. And then the other one would be on the operational side of what expenses do they view as being discretionary that they could hold back on? What are some best practices that they could do to manage cash flow? So if that's, how do they change their collection efforts or speed up that process? And then, and some clients have asked us to assist on forecasting out on making sure, okay, what do they have in the current pipeline and with their current reserves? How long is that? What does that foresee in the future? And then also some clients are also asking us for updating on their processes. So as clients and ourselves included, and the chamber included, has really moved to a remote environment, what assistance can be provided that on the accounting side? So now if their accounting department separate of their check signer and those kind of just practical items, how are different ones so those can be addressed? And then we were able to help out operationally and on controls for those.
Yeah, it seems to be a very intense time on all kinds of fronts that people aren't even anticipating. Like I'm sure that would have caught a lot of businesses by surprise, setting up the virtual office. And then, as you just said, trying to figure out how they get their operations to continue. So you've covered, you've talked about some of the issues people are dealing with, and obviously you're helping them with how to minimize risk. But my next question was, do you have any other general comments about the best ways business owners can minimize risk during this particularly weird state we're in?
Yes, I'd say there would be a few things to think about for minimizing risk. One is having an assessment and redoing your budgets and your cash flow forecasts. So just knowing and this can be done in a few different scenarios of a best case, average case, and a worst case of where does the future lie. And then from there, making judgment calls about, unfortunately, the truth is about variable costs and wages included on what should be done. And really a lot of businesses are impacted by COVID-19 here. Sometimes have to make the unfortunate decision to scale back their operations. So when the world, in the future, when the world's back to normal, that there's a business to come back to. So what's the appropriate level to scale down to weather the storm is definitely one of the areas of focus. So to minimize that risk of going over without having a plan, it's to forecast and plan out what are your cash reserves, what are your outlays that you're committed to. And then I think the other one that we see a fair bit is proactive communication with different suppliers or their landlords and their banks about scheduled payments coming up in the next 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days of what ones can be deferred and having proactive communications about that. So we'll see from retail tenants with a landlord this past month who've reached out to clients about what's if they've closed, they're unable to make the current month's rent, how does that look, and being proactive on when can those payments be pushed back to. And so I'd say to minimize the risk, it would also be proactive. And I think at this point, it's not just foreseeing the expenses in April, it's foreseeing the expenses in May, June, July, and beyond even.
So the federal and provincial government have had quite a few announcements. It's very tough for small businesses to keep up on everything that they're announcing. Along those lines, the province just moments ago announced a 3-month moratorium. They called it a payment holiday, which was a bit of unusual language for BC hydro bills, for example. So we're seeing a lot of tax deferrals, now hydro bills. So are you feeling like with the deferrals that are becoming available, it's actually going to make a substantial difference to the small businesses you're talking to?
I'd say there's two types of programs in a very general sense. There would be deferrals, and then there'd be grants or subsidies. And so with the deferrals, it definitely helps the short-term need, but as you know, the bill always comes due. So in the future, those same payments would have to be made. So certain ones had got deferred till June into September, and definitely I think that helps out with the immediate cash flow needs. But I think as the implications of the economy have evolved, I think they've realized that the deferral is not sufficient. There's a substantive amount of subsidies or grants that are going to be needed, either to businesses in general or certain industries that are significantly negatively impacted, that just a deferral is not enough to keep them afloat. And I think we are seeing that with the loan program to small businesses, as well as the wage subsidy program that was further announced this morning.
Okay, yeah, that was my last question.
Jumped on that.
Yeah, different ways to preserve cash. If you have anything else you want to say about how to preserve cash, please do. And I had a final question before we take questions from our listeners, and I also have some more if we need them. What do you think are the best survival strategies at this point?
So one item relating to cash is proactively reaching out to your bank. So the banks have been communicated with by the government to either allow for interest or principal payments to be deferred, or both in some circumstances, as well as allowing for additional facilities to be created, or additions to the current facilities. So I'd say reaching out to the bank would increase obviously your cash abilities. So that's obviously one to be done. Speaking from the accountant's side, is I know what they'll often ask for this is current financial statement and interim financial statements. So it's definitely if you're thinking that's going to be a need, is definitely to get in the pipeline with your accountant to get those produced sooner than later. You don't want to need the cash and then have to get the work done to create the financial statements. And then something else that would be the big main one for preserving the cash, and it's simple, and I already mentioned it, is reviewing what's discretionary on the expenditure side. And I think businesses that are in financial trouble would need to look at ways to reduce those or eliminate those, and be more efficient. And I do think though, once this does pass, is hopefully those expenses, the discretionary ones, get unleashed and help bring back the local economy, because a lot of those discretionary ones are the ones that keep Victoria the way that it is.
Okay. Do you have any comments about the most recent announcements by the federal government about the 75% wage subsidy and their $40,000 loan with $10,000 forgivable if the 40 is paid back, and various things with regard to how likely you think, how long is that going to help? How likely is that to make the difference between survival and not for some of these businesses that you're dealing with?
I'd say for the larger businesses, the 40,000 isn't going to be that significant. For a company that has a $1 million payroll to make, 40,000 isn't a huge assistance. But for a smaller business, the 40,000 definitely could bridge over not being closed and still making the rent payments and those fixed cost payments that would occur while they're closed down. So I do think the 40,000, it's not for all, won't be the savior for all businesses. It may not be the savior for any business, but it definitely does help on the businesses that say would have reduced operations or closed in the short term, that still have those fixed costs. So I definitely see a benefit to that. For the wage program, and that one is just very recently announced, that it's going to require to be eligible for that, businesses need to show a 30% drop in revenue compared to the same period or for the same month compared to the prior year. And so I think there'd be some challenges on necessarily on the fairness of that, because certain businesses may see a smaller drop in revenue, but a large increase in costs. And then any accountant that's listening would know that revenue has many different ways that it could be actually calculated. It's not always as simple as black and white of is it cash or is it the accrual method or even other methods. That said, I do think that the dollar value of 75% of wages and wages obviously is a major important factor, because it stops employees from alternatively going on EI being important. So I think the dollar value of that is significant, and also the knowing that that's available is significant. And hopefully it becomes something that is passed soon, because I think also the uncertainty with businesses without knowing what's the eligibility of the program, what's the dollar value of the program, and the length of the program, can definitely cause them to pause on operations when, from purely an economic point of view, is you don't want the economy to pause. I do think there always has to be a balance with respect to safety and health that would trump that. But I think once that program gets announced and there's certainty, then I think certain businesses can know, okay, can we stay open in April, May, and June, knowing that we're going to have these much of our wages covered, even if it is reduced operations. So I do think that one is very substantial and very important to many of our members here.
And I think back to how many years now we've been talking about the need to attract and retain good workers, and how hard businesses have worked to get the staff that they have. And I'm thinking just on the basic need to try to retain some of those workers that you rely on heavily and that you have worked hard to get here. The ability to keep them is important for the future, just their capabilities and their contributions to the company, as much as the financial savings that this program is offering.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree, Catherine.
Yeah. So you mentioned in passing the need for grants and recovery funds on a more substantial basis. You know, you made the reference to 40 grand not being enough for big businesses, but there's also a growing appetite for, I hear more and more from businesses saying, and in order to recover, we are going to have some kind of a substantial grant program from the government. Do you have any thoughts, insights? You heard anything like that yourself? Any ideas about how best that could be delivered?
So no, I haven't heard anything beyond the two programs that we've well, there's been other programs, but nothing as substantial compared to the two programs that have been announced. But I do hear your comments, though, of if there is even increased lending by the banks or the governments have increased liquidity, so banks are more encouraged to lend to clients. Clients, still they have to eventually pay. The implication is that they still have to eventually pay back that principal. And so that is the difference between a grant and a subsidy, in that those may be things that in this situation are more needed than loans, where certain businesses, I'd assume, could take loans to keep their payroll and keep open in these months. But unless they see a horizon where they can repay those in a reasonable time frame, I think that's going to have a crippling effect on the economy down the road. So I do see a need for more grants, and I think a real challenge, and I'm not envious of anyone who has to come up with these plans in these short order, is to how do you do it to target the businesses that truly need it and the ones that are most affected. And then maybe there has to be a balance to knowing that they can provide grants or subsidies to a wider array of businesses, and know they may have inadvertently helped ones that weren't as financially hurt. But that's better to do something quick and with certainty than leave the uncertainty where clients aren't sure if they should stay open or close at this point.
Yeah, I would say that both the federal and provincial governments seem to be deciding to be more inclusive rather than exclusive with these programs so far. And, just today when Minister Morneau was talking about was talking about the requirement to demonstrate that you have lost 30% of your revenue. Somebody asked how that applies to a startup or somebody who hasn't got that track record over a year. And he said, look, we're trying to turn something that would take us 2 months into a week-long period to design it. And there's going to be lots of exceptions. And we know that, and we're working on it. So I think there is going to be more and more information rolling out as they try to get this thing off the ground.
No,
I've got yeah, go ahead.
Well, you go ahead.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions here from Randy Kennett. For the $40,000 loan, you need to show a payroll of $50,000 for 2019. What if you pay dividends instead? Will banks consider this?
Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that. The only information I've seen on that is that for the application, you have to submit your T4 summary, which would show a wage for 2019, and it has to be amount between 50,000 and $1 million to be applicable. And so, and I totally understand where the question's coming from, though, because many small businesses would pay dividends rather than salaries to their owners, and for a number of reasons. And are they going to be missed in this, in being captured in this? And so, unfortunately, I think the advice on that is hopefully some details and clarity come out on that in the coming days, if not week, where we could find out, okay, how is this going to be applied practically rather than the general sound bites. But at this time, there isn't any indication that dividends are included, to my knowledge. And
sorry, I didn't catch that last sentence.
To my knowledge, there's no knowledge that dividends are to be included in substitute for wages for owners.
Yeah, there's a lot of IT companies, I think, who do things like that, in particular, dividends and shares and different ways of compensating people. So there are lots of exceptions to the payroll T4. Second question from Randy, any ideas when this loan program will open for applications?
I've seen notices from banks that April 6th is the date when they would start receiving applications. And that's certain banks on the online portal. So I think it's administered through the banks. So it'd be to reaching out to your home bank and who you do your lending with or your deposits with, and seeing what's their process and when they're going to be open for that. But next week is what I've heard when they'll start accepting applications. For the timing of when the payments would come out and how long it would take them to vet the applications, I would be unsure at this point to say confidently how quick that would be, but one would hope that would be sooner than later.
Okay, even earlier this week, we were hearing from some of our members that members who run banks saying that they had no information on the loan program. So it sounds like, is that changing? Do you think that there are financial institutions are now starting to receive more information, or are they just deciding on their own to take the applications and figure it out later?
I think my understanding is I know a few that are opening for applications on April 6th. So I assume, and it might be that, well, obviously the banks are large organizations, so it may not be that it's filtered its way down to all the different branches and all the different employees with full information. But I can't imagine that there hasn't been talks at the top of the bank to the federal government on the administration and the process for this, because it is one of their flagship initiatives.
Yes, good comment. Okay, another thing that Bill Morneau emphasized today was a lot of this is going to be administered through existing channels. For example, he was referring to CRA's direct deposit process and encouraging people to sign up for that. Any comments on how that would assist small businesses to participate?
Oh, definitely. It's a great comment, one that I definitely should speak to is there's obviously been two methods in the past of communicating with CRA. One was by paper and mail or phone, and one was electronic. I think just given the nature of their reduced staffing, everything that you can do electronic would be the best to do so to get a timely response and to get a timely amount of applications. So if that relates for clients having to issue ROEs, which are record of employment for employees being terminated, for applying for Service Canada as an individual for any childcare benefits or GST credits, and then making sure that you are set up for direct payment rather than checks. I think that's definitely very prudent. I just actually noticed, we've noticed this past week, even where we send our mail in, it's no longer accepted in the downtown office in Victoria or even the Surrey tax centers. We have to send it out to Winnipeg. So really anything that you could streamline and do electronic should take out a few steps and then hopefully speed up the process on both sides.
And people can do that themselves online, or do they need to do that through their accountant?
They can do that themselves through their what it's called is My Account, and then they could set that up with CRA. And sometimes they would need information from their accountant if their accountant, they may need information from their last filed tax returns. So if that's the case, they can get that from their accountant.
Okay. So any other we've got a couple of minutes left here, 3 minutes I've got on my clock. So any other general thoughts, observations, or pieces of advice that you'd like to pass along to our members at this very difficult time?
Yes, one, I think it is definitely to plan for the short term, as well as plan for the recovery of what that would look like and what that would change on the business side. And so I've definitely seen some clients that have been proactive and who maybe work in certain industries or in areas that they know are going to be harder hit by this than others. And it's planning of how do you pivot or change and make sure that when the work does come back, is you're not attached to maybe certain industries and separated that, so you've hedged your risk. So and it is early obviously to think about this, but it is, especially in the midst of thinking about just immediate cash flow. But I think once that problem's solved, it's looking at the future of, okay, what's the business model that I have, what clients and suppliers are going to be affected, and what changes need to be done to that to secure your own future, to secure your business's future. And so we've had those started, and maybe this is a little early to start thinking about that objectively, but I do think I've seen a few clients who've started thinking about that in a proactive way, in a way that I think this has necessitated an improvement to their business on the processes, on being efficient, as well as thinking about their business continuity and succession planning.
Very good advice. Okay, so I'm going to say that we're wrapping this up. Thank you very, very much for all that helpful professional advice on issues that are immediately of concern to our members. And I hope that the people listening found it and watching found it useful. Next week at this time, we're going to hear from Marcia McNeil, who's a very prominent local employment lawyer, employment law lawyer, a lawyer who specializes in employment law. And we know that there's a lot of issues with regard to employer and employee relationships going on right now. So as we have heard from great professional advice from Kris today, we'll be hearing the same on the employment front from Marcia next week. So please join us again. And thanks to everybody for tuning in, or whatever you do on Facebook. Tune in? I don't know. Participate. Watch.
And listen. Hit the like button.
Yeah, hit the like button. Thank you again, Kris.
Thank you, Catherine.
Bye. Bye.